Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of MythBusters. I'm Glen Small from the FastTrack for Azure team.
And I'm Chris Reddington, also part of the FastTrack for Azure team.
And today we're going to be talking about requirements when thinking about projects for migrations or new implementations in the cloud. So Chris, requirements, we still need them, right?
We absolutely do. I mean, when you think of any IT projects, typically the first thing you think about is requirements. And if we take it outside of IT and think about just designing a building, I ask you to go and design a building. Is it a hospital? Is it a hotel? Is it an apartment block? How tall is it? How many people does it need to hold? There's a lot of things you need to think about. Yeah. That doesn't change in the cloud. I mean, the cloud is, this new environment you're building in, but you still need to think about those things. So in the FastTrack for Azure team, some of the things, that we think about are really this concept of aim, plan, do, and thinking about architecture for a solution for a project. So we typically start with this aim scenario. So what is it that you're actually building? Is it this e-commerce system? Is it a healthcare system? Because that starts driving some different requirements. Are there data sovereignty issues? Are there compliance issues? What is that underlying problem that you're trying to solve?
The contractual obligations, legal requirements, absolutely.
Absolutely. And then when you understand what that aim is, you can start diving a bit deeper into that problem. So how many users does it need to solve? Are your users based in certain regions? Because all of those factors have a huge impact on how you design your application.
Absolutely.
Things like data replication and all these other factors that then might change cost, might change what solutions and services you use in Azure to actually go and build that project. So that then influences how you actually go and achieve that. So understanding those aims is really important, because the way I like to think about it is it's a little bit like building blocks. We've got loads of different building blocks you can bring to the table in Azure.
Completely.
But it's up to you to go and decide which ones they are.
Absolutely.
So how do you know which ones you need to pick? Well, it's really driven by that previous
That's the big
step,
question.
right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
So that's then also where you need to understand how you've achieved them as well, because what you don't want to get to is the stage where you've built this great solution, but actually what you set out to go and build doesn't meet those requirements.
Completely.
And we've seen that with a few customers, right?
Many times, yeah. Either underestimating or dramatically overestimating the requirements, which leads to a design that either isn't fit for purpose or costs far too much because you've implemented more than you really needed.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's where then it influences, that end solution of which Azure services do you go and use. And then there's the fun part, all of us in technology that we love, we actually go and do the thing, we go and implement, we go and build.
Yes.
So that's the high level around what we do in FastTrack and how we approach it. But if we think about that next layer of when we speak with customers about these things and the common requirements that we see come up, it's things like the service level agreement, how available does the application need to be? And more importantly, if that thing goes down, whether it's an application update, whether it's an infrastructure issue or something more serious, what is the impact of that to the business?
Yeah, completely.
So that's just one high level though, and a lot of people, I'd say, are quite common with that one.
They're very driven by what their SLAs are, but not really digging into what's driving those and what are some of the finer points within there.
Exactly. And if we skip down to maybe the bottom instead of the slide here, if we think about things like recovery point objective and time objective, they're things from the data space that you'll be particularly aware of, right?
Yeah, completely. Again, it drives very much what kind of technologies are we going to put in place, what's the configuration, what geographies do we need to deploy into.
So those are the types of things that I think when we think of successful customer migrations to the cloud, when they have all of these up front, well defined, but really an important one is well understood by the whole team. That's the critical piece, because I've had some customer projects I've worked on where they don't uniformly understand those requirements. So if they don't all understand, they're not working towards a common goal, and there might be some discrepancies, differences in opinion in terms of how you go and get that end goal there.
And to be clear, we're not talking about what colour is the button on the page or something like that here. We're talking about, does the system need to be available 24/7?
Exactly.
How long have you got between failovers if you needed them? These kind of top level requirements here, yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's make it a bit more real. Let's think of a scenario. So we've got a web application, and let's say it's got an availability of something like a 99.95% requirement.
Yeah, pretty typical.
Exactly. So some of the things you need to start thinking about in this cloud world is that if we even think about on-premises first, all of those services in an on-premises world are all held together. So if in that on-premises world something goes down, you've probably got a bigger problem.
Yes.
But in the cloud world, you've got these different pieces maybe hosted on this part of the data center, another part of the data center. Different services have different SLAs. So you need to think about how those all come together as you build that overall architecture.
Yes.
So you can see on the screen here, for example, we've got this different composition of a SQL database, a queue, and a web application. If we brought those all together, what we'd need to do is multiply those all together and calculate the composite SLA for the overall solution.
Absolutely. You don't need a dramatically high SLA on your website if your database is going to be out for a week.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's all of those component parts.
Yes.
So if we take that example of 99.95, let's say, the thing to think about is you want to start from the simplest approach that you can take, and then let the requirements drive that more complex scenario. So if you think about a basic web app, maybe you're in a single region, you've just got that Azure App Service, for example, that you're working on, and you get a certain amount of SLA with that. And for a lot of organizations, it's probably fine.
More than likely.
But if you start thinking about those environments where you need to deal with large scale, maybe you need to distribute across different regions, maybe you need to think about availability if there was something catastrophic and a region went down.
Or even if your users are in different time zones and you've got to accommodate for that kind of factor as well. Yeah.
So this is a great starting point, but we need to let the requirements drive us towards adapting that. And this is actually one of the Azure reference architectures that is available on the Architecture Center as well. And if you're not aware of that, it's definitely something worth taking a look at. And this is where we start thinking then about that scalability. So if scalability drove those changes, you can see the architecture is slightly different. We've now added DNS, some CDN, some different pieces to help us now scale out that application even further.
Exactly. One small part of a requirement there dramatically changing how we're designing this solution.
Exactly right. And then taking that one step further again, that scenario, devil's advocate, what happens if that application goes down in a region for whatever reason? Do you need to have that resilience across the regions there? Do you need to have that? And in some cases, the answer is yes. If it's like a banking application where it's business critical and you need to make sure there's that continuity, those are typically the scenarios where we'd probably see that. But any average customer or average organization coming along may not need that complexity, because when you start thinking about multiple regions, it's not just a case of we've got our services here and here. As you'll know, there's all of these data replication issues we need to start thinking about.
Completely. As well. And this example on the screen here is really articulating if you overfit your requirements, your resulting solution is going to be quite complex, a lot of moving parts in there, and potentially you don't need those because your availability needs are significantly less.
Exactly. And I think just to kind of wrap up here, I think one of the things as well that is a driving factor in this is cost as well. Cost and complexity are always things we think about as another dimension, but actually they are also a requirement. If you think about cost, cost is one of those things that you want to make sure you bring that down, but also meet those other requirements. So it shouldn't be thought about in isolation, it should be thought about as that holistic picture as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. So there you go. Requirements still very much needed in the cloud. Requirements very much driving the architecture and the solutions that we put in place when migrating to Azure.